Thank you. So this is a joint work with Jiří, Řihák, and Papoušek. We are from Masaryk University, Czech Republic, and I will be talking about impact of data collection on evaluation and interpretation of models. So at first, some context. So we have some educational system which is used by students, and we collect data on student behavior, and then we do our analysis. And what we would like to do is to do the analysis and care only about the data, to be agnostic to the way the data were collected. And this is often current practice. Often the researchers who do the data analysis are not the same people as the ones who have implemented the system and collected the data. The main point of our paper is that this is too simplifying, that really when we are doing the analysis, we need to take into account the way data were collected, because there may be biases which influence the data analysis. Particularly, we work in the context of student modeling, and we're talking about evaluation, parameter fitting of student models, analyzing, modeling cognitive knowledge of students on fine-grained level. The data that we analyze are on the level of individual clicks, individual answers. But the main message should be applicable also to other applications of analytics, for example, analyzing data on the level of courses. In the case of student modeling, there is a particularly interesting situation that the student models are often used in the educational system to guide adaptive behavior. And this creates an interesting feedback loop, because the student model determines which data are collected, and these data are later used to analyze the same model, which can cause also interesting bias. I will get to this feedback loop later. So as I said, I will be talking in the context of student modeling. So during the presentation, I will be using some more or less standard student models. But the main point is not a detailed analysis of these models. So if you do not know these models, it doesn't matter. You should just know that these shortcuts are notations for some basically standard student models. So our focus, what we study, are two issues related to this data collection. One concerns the number of answers per students and mastery attrition bias. The other one is effect of item ordering and adaptive item selection. And to study these issues, we use two methods: simulated data in a simulated setting. We study these issues. The simulation allows us to focus on the issues in the control settings to highlight the issues. But we also use real data from our adaptive practice of geography to show that these are not artificially created issues, that they are really present in real data. So at first, setting for the first issue, number of answers. What we would like to have for analysis would be nice to have the same number of answers from each student, so the full matrix. So this is something that people in computerized adaptive testings, for example, have, because when students take tests, they are forced to answer basically all questions, so they have a full matrix like this. This is nice for analysis. But from real educational systems, we have something more like this. Different students answer a different number of questions. So for example, John was active, he answered a lot of questions, Tom answered just 3 of them. This makes analysis more difficult. But still, if the number of answers was a random variable, it would be quite fine, because if we analyze the 7th answer, we would have a random sample of the population, so we would reasonably compare, for example, averages here with averages over there. But the point of our educational system is that they should be adaptive, they should be personalized. So we have, for example, master learning. A simple criterion for master learning is K in a row. So here in this artificial example, students who answer 3 questions correctly, like Alice here, move on to another topic. Mary was particularly fast, John didn't master, so he keeps practicing. Now, if I look at the 10th answer, for example, compute average success rate here, and compare with average success over here, there's a bias because the population of students who answer 10 questions is not a random sample of the population. It's, by definition, the set of weaker students who did not master the topic. So for example, when we use learning curves, a popular method for evaluation and analysis of education data, this creates a bias. So for example, these are results from simulated data, simple simulated data. X-axis, number of answers, y-axis, error rate. The blue line is for the full data. If all students answer all questions, we get nice decreasing learning curve. The green line is the same population of students, just different data collection. Now we use the master learning criterion. So students who answered 3 questions correctly stop practicing and move on to another topic. So now we get completely different curve, much flatter and much noisier, although the population of students is completely the same, just the data collection cost is biased. This is something that was, these are results from simulated data. This is something that was noted already in previous research from real data, for example, from Carnegie networks. So what we add is more detailed analysis of this master attrition and length of trace impact. So for example, we study impact of data collection on parameter fitting. So here, again, some experience with simulated data. We generate data using one student model, BKT. So this black line corresponds to average predictions corresponding to this ground truth, which was used to generate the data. And then we fit the data using different model, PFA. Here we use, this is without master addition, just a nice full matrix. But what we change is the number of answers per student. So if we now fit the model, PFA model, with just 5 answers per student, we get this fit, the blue line. Whereas if we fit the same, completely the same model over the same population of students, just using a large number of answers per student, we get this fit, quite a different fit of parameters. And this is quite interesting because in many cases, researchers, for example, in their papers report the parameters, but they do not analyze the impact of the length of trace. Often they do not even document it, so the papers do not describe the length of trace, the number of answers per student that was used to fit the model, so it's not reproducible, and here we see that the difference can be quite large. When we take into account the master addition, we can get a large impact on fitted parameters, even in the case where we use the same type of model to generate the data and fit the data. So here, this experiment is done using BKT, the popular modeling approach. Here BKT has some 4 basic parameters. The interpretation is now not completely important. These are just some 4 parameters. Here, these are the parameter values for ground truth, the values that are used to generate the data. Then we feed the model, the same model, the BKT model, just we feed the parameters from the answers, and we use the full matrix, 20 answers per student. The fit is quite nice. The fitted parameter values are quite close to the ground truth parameters. But when we use the same data, but with different data collection, now with master learning, so after the correct, students terminate practice, we get completely different values of parameters. So now, for example, if we would interpret these values, which is often done in research, we could lead completely misleading conclusions. For example, we can conclude that the initial knowledge of students is very high, whereas in truth, now here we know that because this has simulated data, the initial knowledge is not that high. And so this was the impact on parameter fitting. Similarly, the data collection can impact model evaluation. So here we have a specific scenario where we, again, generate simulated data in some way, and compare 2 of the popular approaches, PFA and BKT, which were compared in many research papers, over the simulated data. Again, in 2 situations, once we have constant number of answers. In this case, we get that PFA is better, achieves better predictive accuracy than BKT. Whereas if we use the same population of students, same simulated setting, but now for data collection we use the master learning criterion, again, K in a row, and student terminates, we get the other results. Now BKT has better predictive accuracy than PFA. So now, this was number of answers master addition. Now I will move on to another way of how data collection can impact evaluation. Here I will just highlight the main message of our work, which is that the data collection may often influence the results more than student modeling. And what research currently focuses on is the student modeling. The data collection is often described only briefly, whereas our results show that it can be really important. So to continue, now as a second type of analysis, we look at adaptability and another type of adaptability and personalization, and that's a choice of items. Let's say that you have many items of different difficulty, some easy ones, some difficult ones, and we want to present students items which are of great difficulty. So for example, in our systems, we often use 75% chance of correct answer as a target. These are items which are not completely easy, but not difficult. The student has a good chance of answering it correctly. And if we collect data in this way, it can again bias the results. So at first, I will illustrate this effect on in abstract simplified setting, and then I will show some real results over the data. So let's say that you have a new prototype for educational system. It's a new prototype, so you don't have the adaptability yet, so you present the items basically randomly to students. And you, using this prototype, you collect some data, and you do analysis. You have read some papers about student modeling, so you implement some advanced student models, analyze it over the data, and you are quite happy because it achieves good predictions. To make some comparisons, you have also implemented as a baseline a constant predictor, which just predicts constant as a prediction. The constant predictor has a full predictions, your advanced model has a good predictions. You see a big difference in the predictive accuracy, so you are happy, and so you go on and you implement the model into the educational system. And you use the predictions of the model to select items, let's say, which are around 75% chance of answering correctly. So now you have a new version of your system, you collect new data, and you, after some time, you do a new analysis. Your model still achieves good predictions, but now the baseline, the simple constant predictor, also achieves good predictions. Because the constant predictor predicts something like 75% chance of answering correctly, which is a quite good prediction because the data that you collected are often for students and items where the chance of answering correctly is 75%, because that's the way that the items were selected. So now, even this naive, basically stupid predictor achieves good predictions because the data collection was in such a way. So now, and the predictive accuracy, the difference is very small. So now if somebody else comes, somebody external comes and looks at your analysis, he is quite unimpressed by your model because he looks at the results and says, your advanced models has basically the same predictions as this constant thing. What have you been doing last year? And to show that this is really something that can happen, we use data from our geography application, which is available over there. It's available in English, you can try it. It's a relatively simple application where you can just practice names and location of countries, places, rivers, and so on. And using this system, we have run several randomized trials, particularly one where we compare the adaptive version of the system with random choice of items. Actually, today in the afternoon, there will be talk given by my colleague about this evaluation. So if you are interested in more details, you will hear it later. Here in this board, we just use the data from these experiments to illustrate this bias caused by adaptability. So in the experiment, we have these two conditions, adaptive and random choice of items. So two ways data have been collected, randomly or adaptively. And here we compare four models, the L rating system, which is used in the actual implementation, and just three very simple baseline, global average, student average, item average. The point is that over the randomly collected data, the differences are quite large, whereas over the adaptively collected data, the differences are much smaller. Still, the L rating system that we use has better performance, but the difference is smaller than over the randomly collected data. And also notice that, for example, for these two models, the ordering actually flipped. Depending on what data we use for evaluation, we get different comparison of some of the models. So this is a specific case of the feedback loop that I mentioned at the beginning. In our case, the student model is used to predict answers. The predictions are taken by the item selection algorithm, which implements adaptability, which decides which data are collected, and these data are later used to fit model parameters and to evaluate models. To study this feedback loop in more detail, we have done some experiments with simulated data. So in this case, this was more complex experiments, so I will mention just some basic ideas. We have used 7 student models, ranging from a constant one, very simple one, to an optimal model. Because we are using simulated data, we know what are the optimal predictions, so at this end of spectrum, we can use the optimal model. We have used each of these 7 models as part of this feedback loop to make the predictions, and simulated the behavioral system and collected data using the student model to guide the behavior. And then over the collected data, we evaluated all 7 models. So for example, here we have used the student average model to collect the data, and then we have done a comparison of the 7 models over the collected data. So I will highlight just some of the points. For example, the difference between the naive way and the optimal way to collect data. If we collect the data using the constant predictor, which basically leads to random collection of data, we see nice big differences between the model, ranging from the naive one to the best one, and large differences. Whereas if we use the optimal model to guide the behavior of the system, so now students get really good personalized questions, what we see is that the differences between the models are very small, because now we choose the questions in such a way that even the naive predictors achieve the good performance. So the point here is that if you have a really good adaptive educational system, it may happen that you have very small differences in predictive accuracy of widely different models. If you get from these results, it would be very wrong to conclude that it doesn't matter which model we choose. Just the main interpretation would be there are very small differences in predictive accuracy. It doesn't matter which one we use, but it does matter because here we use different data, we see very large differences. Another interesting result from this experiment is comparison of these two models. These are two variations of the analytic system with knowledge components, and they differ in just one aspect, that one of them, the yellow one, is wrong by construction. There is wrong mapping of items to components. We have constructed the model in such a way that it is slightly wrong. And the blue one is better one. And if we look at the data collected in some simple way, using a high degree of randomization, then we see non-trivial difference in their performance. The better model achieves better predictive accuracy. But when we collect the data using the wrong model, so here we are using the yellow model to guide the system behavior, the difference becomes much smaller. So this is an illustration of an unpleasant fact that if you are using a wrong model in your adaptive education systems, the collected data may be insufficient to show deficiencies of the model. The model just doesn't collect counter-evidence to its weak behavior. And finally, we have also looked at the impact on parameter estimation in this adaptive choice of items setting. Again, here, using the real data from the geography application. So we study impact on item difficulty, on estimation of item difficulty. So we compare two data collection methods, the random and adaptive from the AB experiment, and we compare the student modeling approach for estimating item difficulty with a naive method, estimating difficulty just as a percent correct, how many answers were answered correctly. So these are the results. On the first line, we have the results for adaptive data collection. Here is random data collection. This column is the student modeling approach. This is the naive baseline percent correct. And the diagram shows distribution of item difficulties, expresses probability of success for average user. So we have a lot of easy items and some difficult items. One observation is that the use of student modeling leads to different distribution size, particularly in the case of adaptively collected data. The student modeling is able to better judge the difficulty of items by the scope. But the main message is that the impact of data collection is actually higher than the impact of student modeling. The difference between the rows is much wider than the difference between the columns. So the impact of data collection is more pronounced than the impact of modeling. So to summarize, our point is the data collection method. You can influence significantly evaluation of models. Sometimes the sizes of differences between comparison metrics depend on the way the data were collected. Sometimes even the ordering of models, which model wins, may depend on the data collection. And also it matters for interpretation of models, particularly fitted parameter values. And this matters particularly, for example, for discovery with models where researchers try to interpret the fitted values and to draw some conclusions for the fitted values. Here it may be very unpleasant when the fitted values depend on the way the data were collected. At the end of our paper, we formulate some consequences of these results for practice. This P. At first, it has consequences for publication of data sets. Currently, the published data sets, the descriptions focus on descriptions of columns available in the data set, but only seldomly the data collection is documented, and it should be documented. Then for evaluation and interpretation of models, if you are the researcher who uses students' models and analyzes some data, particularly data collected by somebody else, downloaded, for example, from DataShop, we should try to understand the data, to inquire into the data collection, and to at least to have some descriptive statistics of the data, to have insight into it, and also it is useful to check stability of results. So for example, for this impact of a number of answers, you cannot make the number of answers longer, but you can make it artificially shorter. So for example, you can try what happens if you artificially set the number of answers to 10. Does it impact the results? Do you have the same results as with the full data set? If no, we should impart in more details into the results. And finally, our results have impact on the data collection itself. So for example, we have repeatedly seen that the adaptively collected data creates some bias in the data which make the analysis more complicated. Randomly collected data are from the point of data collection better, easier to understand. But we still want our systems to be adaptive. So what may be useful is to use controlled use of randomization, to have some questions collected in a random way. So for example, currently in our systems what we do is, in the geography system, what we do is that every 10th question is chosen randomly from some suitable context. In this way, the impact on user experience is only small, because most of the questions are chosen adaptively, only some of them, and they do not know which one, are chosen randomly. But these randomly collected data allow us to do the analysis in a much simpler way than the analysis over adaptively collected data. So that's all for me. Here I have some questions for you about your data, and I would be glad to take your questions.
Thank you, Radek. We have plenty of time for questions while we get Susan's presentation set up. So we'll start down here and then we'll move to there.
Thanks very much for the good talk. Neil Ephraim from Worcester Polytechnic Institute. Making sure that when you're distributing the data that you actually are marking actually which stuff was randomly randomized and wasn't. Sure. I'm sure you must do that, right? Yeah. And you make a really good point that actually all the data in the data shop unless we actually understand the algorithms used behind it, we're going to have a really hard time actually understanding that. I think you just make a great point. Thanks.
Hi, thank you for a great talk. My name is Jiří. I'm from Cadaptive company, Educational Games. So it's a very interesting topic and something I've been thinking about a lot. And my background is more in psychometrics. And so I have two questions. Basically, one is, as a main metric, you use the predictive accuracy. And yes, I can see that if you try to match items to 75% accuracy, that you predict with 75% accuracy. But I think what is often more interesting is not to predict the next answer, but more to see how much are students actually learning and what is actually happening. So it's a different type of inference that I think is more interesting to optimize than the predictive accuracy of your model. And then the second thing is that the way that you calibrate the difficulties of your items, I think is a problem that has been researched a lot in psychometrics, and there are a lot of ways to link samples and occasions. And actually randomization is one of the ways to do that, to make sure that the sample of items is equal or randomized across student samples. So not like the more able group gets a different set of items than the less able group, because that's messing with your item calibration. But randomizing items make sure that you can actually link those two groups better together. So I think that would be a good thing to look into in that respect.
Yeah, there were too many points. So I would just like to, with respect to the properties of students, for example, this learning curves or fitting of parameters corresponds to that we are interested also in the properties of students. And concerning the comparison of predictive accuracy, for example, is error. Of course, this is not the only important point, but it's also this is something that is typically done in the research. Many people have done it, and it's also particularly important. For example, if you want to choose a model for your application. So, for example, in our case, with the geography applications, we have to choose one model which will guide the behavior, and here the predictive accuracy is a natural metric to make the selection. So, definitely, this is not the only thing that we should care about, but it is also one of the things that we should care about, and the parameter estimation is related to the inside group properties of students, and here the impact is as well.
Ken Kadinger, Carnegie Mellon. Great talk. I'm wondering about your subsample technique and whether you've tried that in your simulations and whether you get do the model comparisons look more like the random when you do the, say, 10-item, common item subsample? And
to the point that I mentioned at the end?
Yeah. And then a follow-up, I guess one of the psychometric techniques for dealing with missing data is imputation. I'm wondering if you've tried that and what impact that has on the fits.
No, the answer to the question is no, we haven't tried imputation. And often, my intuition is that imputation is good when you have only few missing data. But in our cases, we often have a lot of missing data, and then the imputation seems to me like that we would be basically inputting too much hallucinated values, and it would be really dangerous. But it may be worth investigating.
Yeah.
And here, actually, we did not. Currently, we use the randomly collected data to do a comparison of the experimental condition in some A/B testing. That's basically the point of the talk that will be in the afternoon. Here, with respect to this talk, the use of randomization, the every 10th question would be similar to basically the randomly collected data over there. In this experiment, this condition always is like all adaptive. Here are all random. In the case where some of them are adaptive and some of them are random, I would expect that the randomly collected, the results over the randomly collected would behave in this way, the results over the adaptive would behave in this way, but we didn't test it exactly in this way.
Well, maybe my first question was misunderstood. I thought you suggested that one way to get around this is to use just the beginning part of the data, where the bias isn't in place, right? So the first, say, 5 attempts that maybe everybody does. And have you tried that in your simulations to see if that improves the model comparisons?
No. So here's the simple answer is no. And we can discuss the more difficult answer later.
But very nice talk too. I want to ask you a conceptual question about how to think about your results. So, could an alternative interpretation or would be the following, which is that there is enormous heterogeneity across students on the way different questions apply to them. Okay, that is not normally modeled in the basic statistical model. But assume for a second that there is no other way in which the data, the question generation process matters. You know, if I knew exactly your state, I could predict probabilistically perfectly how would you respond to the question. Then the reason, if that is true, the reason that your taking into account the adaptiveness and especially optimizing the questions with the adaptive process improves the prediction and eliminates the difference across the models is not so much because there is a data bias. It's because by doing the adaptive process, you have reduced, you have made the model map more similarly to all of the individuals. Because basically the idea is intuitively is the following. Question 1 for you and for me in the randomized may be very different, 90%, 10%. But once you have run the algorithm and you have found the first question that you served to both of us to be of the same difficulty, before we were very different, now we are not. So that is the reason why the problem, the statistical problem is disappearing, potentially. Not so much the data bias, as much as that the model is misspecified, the simple model with respect to heterogeneity, and once you take the adaptiveness, magically you have made the questions more similar to everybody, and that helps with the fitting. I just wanted to see your reaction to that.
Yeah, that makes good sense. Actually, I think that like this comparison that we have here about this difference is not really surprising, but one thinks about it because if I have widely different questions and widely different students, and I ask some of them easy questions, some of them hard questions, then it's quite clear that the cost of prediction would be poor, and it's not difficult to check the predictions. And when we collect the data in a specific way, we can get good results. So I think this is not a surprising result, but it's useful to highlight it because often, particularly once we have the good algorithm systems, we see results like this. And on previous conferences, I have seen many discussions. Well, we have these very small differences in predictive accuracy. It really doesn't matter to study these models. For example, if you have been on Joe Beck's keynote a few years ago at DDM, he tried to raise this point that we are at this point, the differences are very small, we should study different questions. But the point is that maybe the differences are very small because we are actually good with our models. So it really makes sense to study the models even in more detail. Yeah, but I think the results can be viewed in different settings as well.
Okay, can we take one more question while we get this next presentation set up?
Economides from Greece. I have not understood about the adaptive algorithms. Do you use adaptive algorithm with respect to the difficulty of the questions? And the most usual algorithms are based on IRT, item response theory. Tests like GRE, GMAT, they use such kind of algorithms. How you compare your whole concept to these actual given tests by organizations like GRE, GMAT?
Yeah, actually, the models that we use are quite closely related to IRT. There are some variations on these. The main difference is that in psychometrics and testing, we do not expect students to learn, to change their traits, whereas in our application, this is practice applications, so we expect and we hope that students will actually learn and their skill will improve during time. So that's the main difference, but otherwise we are using very similar models. That's a short answer. We can discuss a long answer later.
So Conrad Hughes from Learning Objects again. So both of your cases seem to be ones where the system is in control of the student. The student either answers a fixed number of questions or the system moves the student on once the student is good enough. Do you think that things would be much different in a situation where the student is in control and chooses when they move on, and where we've observed students, some answering tens of thousands of questions and others answering nearly hundreds?
Yeah, it actually becomes even more difficult because you can have more biases. Even in our system, for example, the system presents which question we ask about, for example, so you cannot choose the questions, the system chooses questions, but the student can choose what he will practice. Will he be practicing Europe or Africa, or will he stop practicing now or later? And actually, so we have seen interaction. So we have seen in our data with the master learning bias that students who are good leave the system earlier, but also engagement bias. In some maps, for example, in the difficult maps like States of Africa, the poor students actually go away because it's too difficult, but the good students, for them, it is an interesting challenge, so they keep on longer. So we have an interaction of this engagement bias and the difficult bias, and it becomes really complicated.
Okay, I think we have some progress.